The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to all the viewers. How you all doing? Sister Robin, I hadn't seen you for a while. How you doing? Sister Elon Bomani, greetings to you. Gloria Briscoe, with your sharp self, greetings to you. And for the others, and Brother Ogawa, hardest working man in the internet, not the ignorant, in fact, the Afronet business. Greetings and to DeMarcus, Hotep to you as well. So we've been playing a lot of back shows, and there's been a series on what it is to be human and the Kemetic, Yoruba, Asante conceptions of destiny. And those are some of the best explanations of what it means to be human. To Sister Lisa, Hotep to you and your family from Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah, I'm glad to be here today too. Each time I do a show, it's a lot of work because I don't just come on talking off the top of my head. That's easy for everybody to do, So I did a little preparation for this today. So first thing is I want to just thank people for supporting the show. Thank all of you. I want to thank those that have made contributions. And I'm going to take the advice of one of the viewers that I set up a P.O. box because some people have been having trouble getting their contributions through. For people who are new, hit the red button, the subscriber button. And if you like the show, hit the like button and tell your friends to watch this. And to Rashamela Kumbo, greetings to you. So those those last three shows were focusing on the first one on the difference between Kemetic and African thought, Dogon, Yoruba, and others. And then we had two more, one focusing on the conceptions of destiny coming from the Asante, Kemites, and Yoruba. And then the last one was focusing on Yoruba philosophy. Now, these concepts of philosophy are not the normal concepts that Western trained African scholars take up. They're usually approaching this from a factual standpoint. They're using an intellectual analysis. And they're not really going through the African conception of how not only we got here, but all humans got here. And it's not only the best explanation, it's an accurate explanation. And I spent quite a bit of time on each of these shows comparing the African conceptions of our purpose for being with parapsychology. And parapsychology is the field of people who are very gifted on the spiritual plane, but particularly it's the field of people who have had life after death experiences. They've died for a short period of time and come back, and they've been able to give accounts of the other side. And those click and match what the Yorubas say, what the Asantes say, what the Igbos say. We don't know if the Kemites actually said some of the things that the Yorubas say. I would think they did, but it is not in the writings that we have. And each African system, though it complements the others, it opens the door to a wider understanding. There's a cultural unity, but it's not all just everything is exactly the same. And so this explanation of what it means to be human, or why we came from the invisible plane, the heavenly realm, to here, doesn't just apply to us, it applies to all human beings. And it's just that our culture, because it goes back to the beginning, has root knowledge, the most profound and deepest. So if we're looking, for example, at the Hindu description, they have some ideas about past lives, and they have some ideas about the soul and the spirit. And then they have some distorted views of caste, which are very oppressive. They've got an idea of karma, that we've come back to pay off some previous debts. But they don't get down to the deepest levels that the African systems of origin or destiny or Ka or Ori or Chi. These are all the African conceptions or terms for destiny. They don't get back to the beginning because they're not rooted in the beginning. And the people that they conquered, they didn't use all of their systems. The Dravidians, the Blacks who founded that civilization. So what you're getting is a very deep understanding of how we got here and why we're here. And most of us will say, well, I don't remember that. Well, that's the whole point of life, is trying to get back in alignment with our purpose for being here. And a few people do remember their time in heaven, very few. Most don't. So in the previous shows, I've gone through that. So today is an extension of those discussions applied to what you would consider a weird subject, Donald Trump, but a very important subject. So I'm going to be looking at the African conception of destiny, which is a human conception, because parapsychology people of all races, cultures, and everything else have had this life after death experience. And many of them come back saying the same thing, that they witness spirits in heaven doing certain things, which we'll go back to in a minute here. And so I'm going to be using this to analyze Trump. And next week, I'll be using it to analyze Kamala Harris. And then the following week, I'm going to have a discussion on strategies and tactics when it comes to this election. And I'll be bringing on other people for that discussion. It won't just be me. What I'll be doing today, and the topic for today is the Donald Trump as Ka Ori Chi, understanding the connection between destiny and using astrology to understand who Trump is. And so I'm doing this because this is the best system, particularly astrology, and I'll explain in a minute, its connection to the Ka, the Ori, the Chi, or the concept of destiny. So this is the purpose here. And why am I doing this? Because a few think this is just another election. You don't know what time it is. John Henry Clark used to talk about time, history is a time. Well, history, the real history of time isn't a clock. That's a white boy saying, it's 24 hours a day. It's astronomy. But real history, real time is destiny time. And that the clock itself on your wrist, this one here, isn't going to tell you. And if you're really built into the time, you'll know what time it is. So I don't need to tell a lot of people who are watching this show, some that will come on later, this is a turning point time in history. So, but some will say, it's the same old Democrats, Republicans, all the same. Then you really missed Trump 1. That wasn't the same. But if Trump 2 occurs, then you're going to find out that it's not only Project 2025 of the Heritage Foundation that you're faced with, but you're going to find out there's going to be a lot of stuff in the mix that they haven't even thought up because Trump hasn't thought it up yet. So I'm doing this so that because as a warrior, I've been in many battles, I've lost none. And the first rule, and I didn't learn this from the Chinese, by the way, I hadn't read any Sun Tzu. The first rule in war is know your enemy. The second one is know yourself. And as Amilcar Cabral, the brother in the back there with the sunglasses on, said, your greatest enemies, your own weaknesses. And one of our biggest weaknesses is we underestimate our strengths. So we don't really, some of us do, most of us do not know our strengths. That's our biggest weakness because we're caught up in the slave mentality, a white supremacy, these no good for nothing, blah, blah, and Wolf Manlou, greetings to you, and Chad the Builder, stuff. And I don't use white supremacy, and some people don't get it because it's outdated. They're not supreme anymore. We whipped Trump the last time, and if we have a better appraisal of where he's coming at this time, we'll whip him again. And that's my main concern. I don't have to be doing this because, I know how to handle a Trump in my own life. I'm not gonna be the one plagued with this. It's my people I'm concerned about, not me. So I put a lot of time into this. I'm not wasting my time here because when I see something coming on the horizon, I've got a real good sense of time, historical time. I joined the movement in 1960. That's good historical time because it just kicked off And I didn't know it, and neither did anybody else. But it was in me. And I still got a sense of time, and many of you do, and some of you don't. Those of you that do need to teach to those that don't. Because if you think this is just another election, you need to go and check things out. So this is the purpose of this discussion, is so you will better understand your enemy. You hear me? And I'm using astrology because it's the operational system through which we have an explanation for how we manifest our destiny on Earth. The birth chart is really the destiny outline. Doesn't mean this is what's going to happen, but it is the outline of your gifts, your strengths, and your weaknesses. And as you go through life, you'll find out the trials and tribulations that you face, which are really the great examinations of life. And so I'm using this because most people who are in astrology are not going to connect the idea of destiny, Ka or Ri or Chi, to astrology, because either they're not African, or if they are, they're not into astrology, or if they are, they're not into African conceptions of destiny. But when you are, you'll realize that this is really kind of like your map that you mapped out in heaven that's brought down here to earth. And I'll go more into this. So I'm using this as a valuable tool. I've been an astrologer since 1963, and that's when I entered the battle. Well, I entered the battle in 1960, but I became chair of San Francisco Core in 1963. And I found that this was the best system for me knowing my inner self. The Dogon, Yoruba, other African and African American systems gave me an in-depth knowledge of who I am from my cultural framework, my historical framework, my philosophical framework. But it's astrology that got me to understand my inner self and my strengths and weaknesses. And in battle, and life is a battle, it's not just the battlefield, you need to know both. And either one that you don't know is going to eat you up. If you know your enemy but not yourself, then good luck on any victories. You'll be lucky if you get 50%. If you know yourself and not your enemy, you're not even in the fight. Some of us are not. Because when I hear some of these questions that people are asking when they're being interviewed, Black people on, well, what's your view on this election, for example? Some of them are doing the same thing that white people do. They're saying, well, things seem to have been better under Trump. Well, hell, your head must have been in the toilet bowl. Really? If you're just talking economics, which a lot are, the unemployment rate had gone through the ceiling because the economy had collapsed through COVID and Trump's mismanagement, and a lot of people died. So really, you've been listening to mainstream corporate media, if that's what you believe. You know what I mean? How many of you have relatives and friends that died during COVID? And we got Black people running around that saying it was no COVID. You know, it wasn't any real thing. We'll go into that here and how he mismanaged that. You know what I mean? And it's largely what threw him out of the White House, along with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the fact that we exercised our power that a lot of us don't even appreciate, because I don't hear Black Lives Matter getting any credit. None. All people can talk about is what brother said he lost 3. Yeah, that's no myth. And it's not a joke. It's very serious. So I'm doing this so that if you know your enemy, you're in a better position to defeat him. And the second show I did when I started this, it's going on 4 years now. In the last election, I laid out the roadmap for how Trump would be defeated, and it went that way. Now, I'm not a prophet, I'm a strategist, but I could see the stuff on the ground, and it proved to be true. So Trump, he was talking about this black job, and the sister who won in the Olympics, she said she's got a black job, and then there was some other jokes thrown at Trump on the same thing, on the black job. Well, blacks did a job on you, and we're going to be a part of a coalition that's going to do our best to do another one on you, because I don't like to see my people in any more misery than they have to be. And this is going to give us breathing time to do what we need to do in rebuilding our communities. So this is the real purpose of this analysis. And the biggest mistake you can make in battle is to underestimate your enemy. I have a rule in battle that I give an appraisal of an enemy. I get an appraisal. It's usually not of a person, because I've gone up against institutions, corporations, CIA, FBI, different institutions, think tanks. So I'm not able to do a chart. What I'm able to do is study their weaknesses and strengths. But when you're dealing with the personality, and one that's been around for a long time, you got a lot of basis for looking at it. But I'm going to tell you, Trump has been underestimated. To this day, very few people know his real strength. And when I tell people this, they get PO'd because they just want to dismiss him. Oh, he's a dummy. Yeah, 77 million strong dummy. You better understand this person and the forces behind him, but more important, the forces that he's mobilized. So I'm going to be using Trump's astrological birth chart, but in doing it, it's encouraging you to take a better look at yourself. If you haven't done this, take a look at yourself. And I would recommend, if you haven't had your chart done, check my sister out, because I don't have any time to do charts anymore. And the best astrologers do a lot of charts, and I've done a lot of charts, especially my own, but a lot of others as well. By the way, I'm a personal astrologer and a historical astrologer. In other words, I do astrology of people, including myself, and astrology of nations. Nations have personalities based on the time they're born, and then, of course, their cultural characteristics. But I'm not limiting this analysis to astrology. I'm bringing in biography, because you have to see if what I'm saying a chart says, and if you saw the promotional on that, that's Trump's astrological chart, you got to see, does that match his life? Because normally I would be doing this on someone who's very young. So then the question is, how accurate is your reading? Some of which is already playing out, and you can figure it out based on a person's life by talking to them and seeing, well, is this accurate? They can say yes or no, but a lot of it's unfolding. But with somebody in his late 70s, we've got a full-blown Trump. So I'm using biography, which is personal history, to compare to what the chart says. And then I'm using Trump himself out of his own mouth. I do my homework, baby. I've never lost a battle because I prepare. And that's what you should do in life. Either prepare or you fail because you failed to prepare. That's your real choice. I was in the Boy Scouts in my brainwashed days, but it was actually a good experience. And that's the motto. Be prepared. I'm not doing it because the Boy Scout said it. It just makes common sense. And when you're going up against an enemy much stronger than you, oh, you'd better be prepared. Because when I read Sun Tzu and stuff like that, their advice is don't fight unless you outnumber your enemy. Well, that ain't going to work for us. So you're going to have to be real good at strategy to win against an enemy who's stronger than you are. So for me, being prepared is not everything, but it's the most important thing. I've always said there's two things in life that are key to success: good character and discipline. Good character and discipline. I don't need to really ask you, does Trump have the good character? You pretty well know, no. He's even said, I've done some evil things, but I didn't do this. Uh-oh. But hard work, well, we'll see. Hard work, is that something he's done? And by the way, that is the major point made by the Yoruba and by all African spirit systems when dealing with destiny. Your opportunity or chance to achieve your destiny is based on two things: good character and hard work. And of course, knowing what it is, at least knowing something about why you're here that gives you a clue on that. And that's what some of these previous shows covered. So I also want to speak to the limits of astrology. Astrology does not tell you a person's level of spiritual development. Astrology does not tell you a person's culture. Astrology does not tell you a person's race. And by the way, race is an invented category. White boy invented it. You hear me? Like many other concepts, it's going out. You know what I mean? But we have to be race conscious. As long as racism's on the scene, we need to be race conscious. But being race conscious don't make you no racist. We ain't that. Because to be a racist, you got to have two qualities. One, you got to think you're superior to another group, so-called another race, and you have to exercise oppression to carry out those feelings of superiority. Very few blacks feel that they're superior. Now, of course, you might say your culture is greater than someone else's or something, but superior, no, we generally don't have that attitude. And last time I studied it, blacks ain't lynch nobody. We're shooting a lot of each other. And of course, we can talk about causes. They put drugs in the black community and everything else, but as us, it's going to have to clean that up. And that's self-hatred that's going on there. So that ain't quite the same as racism. It's something that's being directed against your own people, which is a sad thing that we have to clean up. And that comes through self-love. And that comes through self-knowledge. And that comes through self-respect. And that comes through organization. And that comes through stopping this mess. You know what I'm talking about? So I want to say that astrology ain't everything, you know. Now, I also know this subject is a controversial subject. Some of you may be open to it. A lot of people aren't. At one time, I wasn't. Until I became more deeply spiritual, I was a see, touch, and smell person. If I can't see it, touch it, and smell it, it ain't real. That was me. And one of the first breakthroughs that got me into astrology was when my mother's best friend's, well, not best friend, but good friend's daughter, who was a Mexican American, and my sister's godmother, taught us astrology. And the first thing she did before I was open to it is she did a spot reading. A spot reading is where you just look at an ephemeris. An ephemeris is a book that has the listing of planets for years and their motions, their cycles. And the German ephemerises are the best because they're down to the minute. And what you do is, you know, you take the person's time of birth, and then it's called the spot reading. because normally for me to do a chart, it takes me about 30 hours to look at a person. And I did a lot of work on this, though Trump's chart is fairly simple. It still took time. And then I'm doing different areas, not just astrology. So her name was Addie, a Mexican-American woman, a very nice lady. And she told me things about me that my mother didn't know. And it was accurate stuff. See, I'm a see, touch, and smell person. Facts still matter to me, you know? Truth always has mattered. So that made me a confirmed believer. And then we began to take classes. And so while I'm in the middle of these battles and stuff, I'm also studying astrology. And then by 69, when things had slowed down, then I'm going deep into it. So for me, this has been very valuable. When I did the retreats that I've talked about, where I had to go on retreats for 5 years, 3 months a year to look at myself, that was a combination of looking at Dogon philosophy, which gave me some ideas of how to reconcile my weaknesses, because I was strong on the masculine and weak on the feminine, and what feminine meant in the African conception. So the African philosophical ideas coming out of the Dogon system, that told me that real perfection is balance between the masculine and the feminine, the intuitive and the intellectual, the emotion and reason, and all of this stuff. But at the same time, the reason that I could identify my problem was astrology. I knew based on my chart, that's where I was weak, the feminine thing. So for me, then that became a tool for introspection. And I do a lot of introspective work, a lot of it. And I think it's very important. Don't blame everything on what's happening outside. We'll see the person we're studying today does that a lot. But a lot of us do it too. You always got to own your part of something. And it usually is what lies inside of each one of us. And so that internal work is extremely important, because it's like weeds in a garden. It's pulling the weeds up. And you're never going to get all of them up, because we're here to get closer to God, but we're not going to get anywhere near as close as we'd like to, meaning we're going to be far from perfect when we leave this place. Let's just be more better. So while astrology is a controversial subject, and in my first 2 years of teaching at San Francisco State, I wouldn't talk about it. And then I realized that that's a mistake. People are going to learn from this. And so I started sharing it. So the first question, and for some people that's been watching the show for a long time, you've heard this before, but a lot haven't. The first question is, so what is astrology's connection to Africa? What's its connection to Kemet, Egypt, to the Dogon, and to other people? Well, we know that both the Kemites and the Dogons were master astrophysicists, and they were into both astronomy and astrology. One reason why we have trouble accepting the notions of astrology is that we've been brainwashed. Christianity has put this down as spookism, even though the Pope has the largest astrological library probably in the world. And generally, some of our people who are into astronomy have no idea or belief that there is any connection between astronomy and astrology, yet they were one in the ancient world, only ruled out as the Greek view of the world, in which everything is materialized and despiritualized, and spirit is taken out of everything. So astrology was separate from astronomy, metaphysics from physics. Every realm of thought was basically materialized and put putting people on the lower realm of the mind. That's what my book on Seba and Sodiah, which will have finished this year and it'll come out the beginning of next year, is focusing on. So I pointed this out before, and I'll state it again to preface this discussion. The Kemites, the Egyptians, gave birth to astrology. And virtually every ancient African civilization practiced it if they were at that level to be able to do so. The Chinese did, the Mayans did, name the civilizations that didn't. So I want to quote a passage from Herodotus, who Herodotus was a Greek historian who traveled in in Egypt during the later period of Kemetic or Egyptian history, when Blacks were no longer ruling the country, but they were still in charge of the mystery systems, and they maintained the records of the history of their people and so forth. And this is what Herodotus said. And by the way, he had no problem observing that the Egyptians were Black. That was a matter of fact. The whole world pretty well knew that. It's only the modern day mystifiers who are going to say that they were of the spirit of Asia, as Hegel said, the major author of white racism. So Herodotus made this observation on page 108 on the book called The History, Herodotus and History, states that, quote, "The Egyptians likewise discovered to which of the gods each month and day is sacred, and found out from the day of a man's birth," and this would be a woman's as well, what he or she will meet in the course of their life and how they will meet their end days and what sort of man they will be. Discoveries of which the Greeks engaged in poetry. Now, what the Greeks did when they took this from the Kemites is they used this for the person, for the individual. The Kemites used this for the pharaoh. They didn't use it for individual people. And we today, of course, we use this for people as well as nations, and not just for the so-called great ones. And so my training has been in studying this and then looking at the angular relationships of planets, because that's what this is. It's not so much what you think it is, your sun sign. I'm a Leo, or you're a Gemini, or you're a Capricorn. Yeah, those are important, but it's the angular relationship of planets. And by that, I mean how close they are or how far apart they are. And that's why astronomy is key to astrology. You have to know planetary motions, their cycles. And so when I do this thing on Trump, and I'm going to be making certain comments, it's going to be what's called aspects, ASPECTS. These are relationships between planets. And the major ones are conjunction. Those are the closest relationship that planets have to each other. They emit a certain kind of energy, depending on the planets and the signs. My best friend, Kayode Solowazi, is a person who has a chart full of conjunctions. Because he's a highly evolved person, that means he strives for unity, because these planets are close together, But if you're a lowly evolved person, then that same set of conjunctions could mean something else. So that's another thing about astrology. There's not one meaning for planetary relationships. It depends on the level of the person. It depends on the work that a person has done. It depends on the choices that people are prepared to make. And I'll go back into this in a minute. So for me, the learning involved learning a lot of different things because it's like driving or anything else. Walking, you've got to crawl before you can walk. So there are many pieces to this to put it together. And so the biggest one is understanding how planets relate to each other. And it's the relationship of energies. And so another relationship is planets who are far apart. Those are called oppositions. A full moon, planets are far apart. The sun and moon are far apart, or any two planets could be. Or a trine. It's a 120-degree relationship. It's not as far apart as an opposition. It's closer, but it's not as close as a conjunction. But those energies tend to be harmonious. But that doesn't mean always good. Good and bad are kind of terms that don't work too well in astrology. It's positive and negative, you know what I mean? And it can vary according to how you take a situation or an experience. And then you have planets that are apart to such a degree that we call their relationship a square. And that means that the energies are discordant. They don't work well together. Those generally require that you will have to deal with change, So that's what this is really about. Energy relationship. Energy is tied to God, to the conception of God. Now, for Western astrologers, they're not trained in this because their God concept is kind of separate from astrology. And the Catholic Church will tell them, oh, this is, God, not God's work. This is superstition or whatever. And a lot of Christians, period, will have trouble with this because of the teaching. But essentially, the God concept that is more physical is going to kind of make it kind of hard to apply the concept of God to astrology and astronomy. And astronomers don't to this day, obviously. It, for them, is a material system of planets and motions and so forth. But if we go back to what I've covered before, the Kung or San people's conception of God, and then compare that to the Bambara conception of God, which I think are getting to root conceptions, then it provides a better understanding for how planets can emit energy, how they can be the sources of energy. So what do the Kung or San people, which is my passion, who are the world's first people coming into being 149,000 years ago, what do they say about God? They say God is Illani, Illani. Those of you who have read The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, know that that is their description of God, which means Illani is the light, God's light, that they say lights up the stars and is the light that gives life to everything, whether it's animate or inanimate. And so everything is ultimately energy. And that's the basic conclusion of quantum physics and astrophysics. So planets have energy. You and I have energy. And that's really what you're charting, what you're looking at. Now, the Bambara of Mali, and I've said this before, but I'm applying this to astrology now, they describe God, who they define as Ma Ngala, M-A-A, and then N-G-A-L-A, Ma Ngala. And by the way, human beings are called Ma. Ain't that interesting? Which is telling you God's within you. You hear me? A part of God. This Illani. And so what do they say of God? God is infinite force outside of space and outside of time. We know that people who have gone to the heavenly realm say it's a realm outside of time. It's a realm of experience. Things are not governed by the watch there, So God is this infinite force. When we talk about the soul, which the people of India are good at, they have a correct understanding of this. Africans have a deep understanding that the soul, for example, is that light that is within each of us. And it is that light of God that the Bombard would call the light of wisdom. The Julius Garvey, Marcus Garvey's youngest son, and I'll be having him on many more times, a surgeon, a retired surgeon, describes as consciousness. In physics, this is called waves and particles. And yeah, fine, but they are always trying to define something so that it's almost material. And I'm not saying throw out waves and particles, but you better understand the essence of that is consciousness. He's right. Everything that God has created is consciousness. When George Washington Carver would go out 4 a.m. and communicate with trees, with insects, with plants, with inanimates, all of which considered him a friend, they would communicate wisdom to him. That's why he was gifted with the gift of botany and healing plants and things. But his openness to the vibratory forces, to Ilani, or to the infinite force that's in everything, is what made him an inexhaustible supply of creativity and wisdom. And it was his humility that made him accessible to that. It was his kindness. It was his concern and love for humanity and for plants. And that made him a purveyor of beauty. He said what most of our people say, that he came to bring beauty out of ugliness. And that's what most of our artists, our musicians, anyone that is into creativity among our people say. Because this is an ugly reality we're dealing with. And this topic here that I'm dealing with is a part of that. But, you know, when you draw on that inner light, that inner spirit, you're drawing on beauty. So every planet has specialized energy fields of consciousness. You won't get this in any astrology book, by the way, because their disconnection from a deep spiritual system makes it difficult for them to reach these kind of conclusions. So every planet has specialized energy and specialized consciousness. The Kemites, the Dogon, and other astrophysicists in their ancient period observed these planetary movements. And in fact, Kemetic society was pretty well organized to try and reflect heaven and the heavenly forces. And so in one of the previous shows, I made the point that geography and Kemet didn't start from just measuring the earth. It started from their need to measure heaven. And this is missed by most of our African-centered historians, some of whom say openly that Kemetic science was free of religion. How can you say that? First of all, yeah, it was free of religion because they didn't have any commandments and rules, but what they really mean is free of spirit, because that's what it was, a spirit system. And how can you say that when the noon is the source of all beginning for the Kemites? Now, this is their story, which is a watery like mass. But what is the essence of the noon? It's an electromagnetic energy. It's a consciousness. Huh? Water is consciousness, particularly flowing water. And in fact, people who dream a lot you probably know, it's not a bad idea to have a bowl of water next to your bed because it will help you in conveying dreams. And it's nothing more healing to be living around water, oceans or rivers, you know? So what the Kemites did and what we do today is study these planets, study their angular relationships, their conjunctions, trines, squares, oppositions, and there are other aspects. Aspects are the relationships between the planets. And over time, you're able to see how they work in people's lives. And within astrology, there are masters who have discovered certain specific insights into what certain things mean. For example, in astrology, in addition to the relationship of planets, how close or how far apart they are, there's what's called elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Most astrologers, until recently, in the West at least, did not really understand what those relationships really meant. And it's not just what earth means and air means, but the mixture of them, because that's the way things are working. It gets mixed up. And so there are masters in astrology. There's one who has mastered that. And there are others who have mastered other things. And you know that because when you apply it, it works. In the first place, I apply it is to me, and I know it works. And then to other people whose charts I've done, you know. So when I deal with Trump today, I've seen this in other people. I'm going to say sometimes, oh, I've seen this. This could lead to that. But it never means it will lead to that, because astrology aspects, planets are not what determines what happens. It's your free will that determines it. It's your choice that determines it. There's nothing predetermined by planets, environment, culture, or anything else. You are the determiner. And it's what choices you decide to make. And the proof of the pie is in the pudding. You got a lot of people who, under the same circumstances, make many different choices. That's because you got free will. So later for this, woe is me. It ain't my fault. Someone else made me do it. Yes, we can be in some very bad situations. Look how bad we've been in this country. But did we choose to be like them? Most of us, no. So it's your choice. So when I'm doing the reading on Trump, I'm going to be looking at certain planetary relationships, and then comparing and showing what it generally means, and then looking at his biography and showing how it plays out. Sometimes coming out of his own mouth. So when we connect Kemetic or Yoruba conceptions of human origin, known as Ka in Kemet, Ka is portrayed as two upright hands. So this is the portrayal of the pharaoh Hor. They say king, but Pharaoh Hor. This is an exact replica of him, and it's his Ka. I've explained this before, and in fact, you watch the series, I went through this, but now I'm showing you how it works in the case of astrology. So what you see is Ka means double, the two upright hands that are over this pharaoh's head. What this means is this is the double of you. This picture here is the spirit replica of the pharaoh Hor. This is the spirit replica. It looks just like he looked. But this isn't the physical entity. This is the spirit entity. Now, parapsychology confirms this. People who are gifted spiritual mediums, they can actually see a person's double. They call it, and see, I use all of this because I'm into proving stuff that it's real. Anytime you hear me pushing stuff, it's not some abstract theory. In science, theory is something that's proven. But in politics, it can be abstract and not work, or history. It may be real, it may not be. I'm into the real. I don't do stuff, I'm not pushing stuff unless I've tested it and see that it works. And so in the case of the field of parapsychology, the reason I'm comparing these two is because parapsychology is the life after death experience that people have when they go to the other side. But it's also the field of gifted spirit people who see things, who have a high spirit consciousness. And so those in the realm of parapsychology call this same thing that the Kemites call the ka, or the double. They call it the etheric double. And it's the same thing. And by etheric, they mean that the spirit on the spirit plane, this picture here, the spirit double is on the spirit plane. And so it's outside of space and outside of time, as God is. And it moves at a much faster rate. And therefore, it's not solid. But when molecules move at a constant rate, then things become solid. That's where matter comes from. That's where our body comes from. That's where Earth comes from. So they're giving you the same description with their term, etheric double. Now, we also know, and if you go back to what we've covered before on the Ka and Kemetic systems, the Ka also refers to a person's life force. That is, it is the energy of life. If the Ka leaves you permanently, you're finished. That is the force that keeps you alive. The Ka is also this double, that which keeps the record of your life. When you go to the other side, you experience judgment. It's not God judging you, it's your Ka judging you. And it's going to tell everything. So don't be pleading with your Ka to please tell everything good. No, it's going to tell you everything. And according to parapsychology, when people go to the other side, they experience immediate judgment in that they see their whole life in milliseconds flash before them, and they see the reactions of everything they did in their life to someone else. They see if it was positive, if it was negative. And that's judgment. Of course, these people have come back, so they've been able to share this experience. So if the judgment is more negative than positive, you know where you're going. More positive than negative, you know where you're going. Now, some people say, oh, there's no hell. I'll say this, there's no devil. God rules heaven. God rules what you call hell, because that is not a place of permanent residence, like life imprisonment. Africans never had no confinement called prison. It's a place where you stay until you undergo remorse and change. And God governs that one too. And some who have gone to the other side and have lived more negative than positive lives, have seen their friends in molten pits screaming and hollering. And they come back trying to change. Oh, Lord, it's the fear that's driving it into them. Hell, you should have been doing right just because it was right. But hey, God's giving you another chance. Hopefully, you can do enough to correct what you've done. But if you've done as much wrong as your friends did, well, you just might not stay there as long. You know what I mean? So this is the ka carries the impression of your life. So this is the Kemetic idea. See, each African system basically subscribes to the same ideas, but they give you a different angle, a different spin. And that doesn't mean one was wrong and the other was right. What I'm going to say about the Yoruba and the Igbo and the Asante, the Kemites probably understood the same thing, but we just don't have any proof in the writings. So when we go to Yoruba philosophy, they say that, and by the way, so Ka also means destiny. It means your purpose on life. That is the major reason for this symbol, and the major meaning of the symbol is it means destiny. And so people like Theophilo Benga will say it's not something that only the great people have. It's not something that is just automatic. But the Kemites are not as clear on how this destiny works on, the basis of a person's life. It's not as clear. But what they are clear on is very profound. And so you just add it to what other African systems say. So what do the Yorubas say? And I've been into Ifa, the Yoruba system, for over 50 years. My Orisha is Obatala. My favorite color is white. Obatala is the Orisha of wisdom, the first of the spirits. And Orisha is like a netter. It can either be an ancestral spirit, a great human being that evolved and later became a spirit force, or a spirit that was with God all the time. And my Babalao is Araba Ifeyemi. Araba is the second highest office in the Ifa system, and he's a great priest. He's helped me with many things, including keeping me alive. So the Yoruba have, and the Asante and the Chi have this same version. That according to these three systems, but I'm focusing on the Yoruba here, when the spirits were in heaven, at some point, when they're making a decision to come back to earth, they pick their destiny in heaven, they pick their time of birth, they pick their parents who have reached agreements with them at other points in their heavenly journey. They pick their strengths and weaknesses, and they pick their trials. But they do not pick the outcome, because the purpose on earth is for you to do your thing. That's why spirits line up to come here. They line up so that they have an opportunity to grow, because you grow through making choices. So the law on earth is the law of twin linearity and unicity. That is, wherever there's a positive, there's a negative. Wherever there's good, there's bad. Wherever there's a masculine, there's the feminine. Where there's up, there's down. And so we're in this realm of twinness. And spirits come here because this is the place where you can really grow. Heaven, there are realms of heaven, and people are learning. But before they come on this journey, parapsychology tells us they undergo training for this journey on earth. So I'm going to say this. When I start reading Trump's chart, there are no bad destinies picked in heaven. I'm going to say this because a lot of us, that's a cheap way out. Oh, it's a bad person. He just born that way. Evil. Most rapists we discover were raped. They then had the choice of, are they going to turn this guy in, or a woman, but it's usually a man? Are, they going to do something about this? And are they going to make the decision that they're not going to do this to anybody else, or do they end up doing it themselves? It's your choice. It's your choice. You know what I mean? And so we have people who have been abused who are abusers, and we have people who have been abused who make choices. Never will I do that. Never will I do that. That's your choice. In fact, the most valuable tests in life are the hardest and most miserable ones. Those are the most valuable ones. And that's what I call the oh shit moments that you don't want to have. You hear me? But the question is, when you go through them, what did you learn from them? So what's the connection between the Ka, what the Yorubas call Ori, or what the Igbos call Chi, and the astrological chart? What's the connection? The destiny we pick in heaven is based on planetary alignments that provide energy fields and consciousness fields that are the best for us making the choices that we will decide whether we'll make when we get to this planet Earth. And we generally come here with missions. And these missions are to do something to advance humanity. All of us do. None of us come here with an evil mission. It's our choice on Earth to do that. In Medu Nature, they have a saying. I'm not repeating it exactly, but God says, the wrong that man and woman do, I had nothing to do with. It was their choice. Because God is like, in fact, God is greater than the best parent. The best parent, when they've raised a child, they know that child is now free to fly. As my mother would say, my children are children of the world. And while they may try and counsel them, they know basically now it's going to be up to them. Well, imagine how much unconditional God's love must be that God could allow all this mess to go on because it's based on free will, free choice. It must hurt like hell for God to see the hell on this earth. It must pain God beyond any explanation, you know? But God's the greatest parent of all. That unconditional love, God knows that you prepared for this journey, and now God is sitting back to see what you'll do with it. And so the planetary chart that Herodotus discussed basically describes the journey, the road that will be before us, It defines the strengths and weaknesses we bring with each other, because that's what we're here to work on, the weaknesses. And so if you have strengths, use them, but you're not going to be able to fully express them unless you transcend, overcome, work on your weaknesses. And none of us get them all straight. So self-knowledge is the key, and then self-discipline, self-introspection, self-work on the weeds in our garden. Now, the thing that I would say to correct what Herodotus said, when he said that the astrological chart would also tell what sort of man or woman we will be. That's not true, because that's based on choices. And so he's reading his own stuff into what he was told by the Kemites. I doubt that they told him that, because they knew that free will was the key thing. So this is the preface for getting into Donald Trump's chart. See, I have to really love you to even do this work, because who in the hell wants to deal with this? Certainly, I didn't. So this is Trump's astrological chart right here. Got any astrologers in here? If so, say so. You know, if you got anybody, say so, because you might want to share your own interpretations of this chart as we go through this. So this is the best system for self-knowledge. The Kemites had a saying, man, woman, know yourself. Self-knowledge is the basis for all knowledge. And this is really the basis for self-knowledge, the knowledge of us as human beings. Wolf Manlu, he's dabbled in it. He's being honest, but he knows some stuff. So if you have any observations, make them. Now, this is not only the best system of character analysis for yourself, for you to know yourself, but is the best system for seeing people through their own eyes rather than yours. That is real key to understand. You don't do judgment when you do a chart. You don't do judgment. All you say is, because what you're looking at, this chart that I'm going to explain in a minute, is what you're looking at are various planetary arrangements, but it is your miniature universe. See this whole thing about as above, so below? You know, we're the microcosm of the macrocosm. We're the smaller part of the larger part. But what system do we have for that? This is the system right here. This is your world. This is your universe. This is your personal cosmos. And this, in this case, this is his. And it's a question of what you do with it. And there's so many sides to this, you'll never fully know yourself in this system or generally at large. You know, your psychology or your culture, your level of spiritual development, which astrology doesn't cover. You'll never know all of that. You know what I mean? So this is the miniature universe, because these are all the planets in the solar system. These are the energies of those planets inside of you. And in a previous show, I went through showing that modern astrophysics has confirmed that all we are is stellar dust. We are made up of the same composition as the stars and planets. So this is your heavenly map on Earth. So when you get into analyzing a person, you're not judging. You're looking at, okay, this is the way things are. But then with a full-blown life like Trump's, you're looking at what they did with it. So then you can make some comments on that, and they will, even though they're not conscious of this system, not conscious of too much of what's going on internally inside of themselves. So I'm also, as I said before, comparing this to biography. That is a person's life. So I'll explain this aspect means this. And then I'm going to take examples from their lives to see if it really meant that. And some of the best observers when it comes to biography of us are people close to us. And so I will particularly use Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who surprisingly has some very interesting things to say about his father-in-law. And he has some very negative things in private to say about him. But he served as kind of like deputy president for Trump during his first administration. And hopefully that's the last one. So I'm going to start with astrological aspects. What I'm going to say here is, these are all here. You all can see this pointer here. Say yes, somebody. Can you see it? Can anybody see this pointer here? Somebody say yes. Let me know you can see it. Wolf Manlu, can you see this pointer? Okay, I'm assuming you have, or you can. So, yeah, okay. Say yes. Commissar, focus on this one right now. Deal with bioweapons later. Focus on this one. So this is a chart, Trump's astrological chart. And it's a chart that shows that he was born at 10:54 a.m. in New York City on the 14th of June, which makes him a Gemini. And so these are the planets. Here, Uranus, the planet Uranus, and the sun. They're close. They are conjunction. You can't see it. Can anybody else see this pointer? Can anybody? Someone says it's hard to see, but can you see it? Wolf Manlu, can you see it? Put it here. Can you see that? Wolf Manlu, answer this. Yes or no? You said very hard to see. Okay. So you can't see it. Can't see it. Okay. All right. I was told this would work. Okay. All right. So that's going to pose a problem here. So when you look at this chart, you're going to see a lot of signs on the left side. Okay. So the quadrant I'm talking about right now is the top, and it's the highest point, and it's left, and you see a green and red sign there. Can you see that? Say yes or no. Quick, somebody say yes or no. Can you see these signs, and can you see their colors? Green, red. Okay, good. All right. So the green sign is Uranus, the planet Uranus. The red one that's next to it at its highest point is the sun. Okay? They're close together. They're in conjunction. This is the most important aspect in Trump's chart that explains his strengths and weaknesses better than any. And it is one that is least understood, and I'll get to it later. Then you see next to the highest point, next to it is the area that has two signs that are the signs of Cancer, and they're green. Actually, three. One is Mercury. One is Saturn. One is Venus. Venus and Saturn are close. They are again in conjunction. This is very important because when I talk about his early childhood, this has real importance. And then mid-level almost, you have a red symbol. That's Mars, and it's in Leo. These other planets up here are in Cancer, Mercury and Venus. And this is Pluto up here that's blue. That's Pluto, Leo. This is very important because it's going to describe a very prominent part of Trump's character. And then on the lower left-hand side, you have a blue planet, and that's Neptune. And then on the other side, and Neptune, and then there's a red planet, Jupiter. These are in Libra, the sign Libra. And then on the lower bottom right side, is a blue symbol. That's the moon, and it's in Sagittarius. And it's in opposition to his sun and Uranus. These are all extremely important, okay? Can you also see the pointer, or you just see the planets? Which is it, Ogawa, that you can see? Can you just see the planets, or can you also see the pointer? Ogawa, put up an answer right away. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start with Trump's childhood. He's already, Wolf Manlu is already drawing some conclusions here. Okay, so I'm going to start with the relationship of planets, which is next to the highest level, this here, where the green one and the other one is Venus. And okay, you can see planets. So this Venus and Saturn, this is in conjunction. It's a close relationship, and it's in the sign Cancer. He has a lot of water in his chart, a lot of air, more air than anything, and fire. And I'm going to explain what he doesn't have later. So Sun conjunct Saturn. I know what this aspect is. I've dealt with it in doing other people's charts. I also have personal experience in a different way than he does with this. So this is actually Venus conjunct Saturn. Venus conjunct Saturn right here. Venus here, Saturn here. Now, Venus is 25 degrees in Cancer. Saturn is 23 degrees in Cancer, Saturn. Why is that important? It's how close a planet is to another planet that determines its energy field. If it's too far apart, in astrology, if it's more than 8 degrees apart, it's not going to have that much effect. But if it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or even 7, it has an effect. The further apart, the less effect. This is close. These energies are 25 degrees Venus, 23 degrees, 2 degrees apart. That's close. Okay. So what does this mean? Generally, it means that a person like this is going to place in their life, duty is going to come before family. And probably in this person's life, someone in their family is going to place duty above family. By the way, Malcolm had this aspect. It is an indication in the case of Trump's chart that Trump as a child would be fixated on one of his parents. They would be of exceptional importance to him in his life, and would have a great effect on his life. It generally means later in life, you're probably going to be married to a person who is of a different age and a different social background. If you look at Trump's wives, they're all Eastern European. His latest one is Melania Trump is much younger than him, you know. No college education, a fashion model, but shares a lot of Trump's views, apparently. So generally, different age, different social background. My brother had this aspect. He was married to a white woman who was a very nice person, by the way, but a different social background, you know. So that's part of what this means. The fixation for Trump was on his father. He had a fixation on his father. His father was central for him. In my family relationship, my mother was much more central because she did all the child rearing and my father worked 2 jobs. So he was a heroic figure, kind of idolized, but my mother, she was close up and she administered the heavy manners and everything else. I'm saying this because my aspect is similar, but not the same. So I know what this is, but I've seen it in a whole bunch of different charts. And so my mother, one of the reasons that I went on retreats is because I idolized the feminine. I didn't idolize the whippings. Y'all know about the whippings. But I idolized a lot about my mother. She was a wonderful human being. And so I was blindsided in that she became an archetype for me almost. You know what I mean? And so what I could see immediately in a brother that's wrong, I might miss it with a woman. And so that was part of what my retreats were about. So someone in the family is going to be central and a person is going to be fixated on them. Positive people who have this relationship, and this doesn't apply to Trump, are very loyal in relationships. Malcolm had this relationship. So a lot of you will say, well, yeah, Malcolm didn't play around. Well, no, he didn't. Part of the reason is he had Sun oppose Saturn, Venus opposed Saturn, whereas Trump has Venus conjunct Saturn. But it leads to similar behavior. If you're positive, you're going to be very loyal. You're going to be very trustworthy, you know. And that was Malcolm. Malcolm never played around. That's me. You know what I mean? That ain't Trump. Huh? You got choices. Now, the mother is a absent figure in Trump's life because after 2.5 years of age, the mother had a troubled pregnancy. And so she was not able to tend to Trump. So they did not bond together. And Rudolph Giuliani says that Trump doesn't mention the mother's role much in his life, and said that his father would probably have been the one that would have administered love, and we'll see what kind he administered. So there was not a bonding between Trump and his mother. And given his own astrological aspects, he has choices. You got choices, and you know he responds in a certain way. Trump's mother's appraisal of Trump as he began to grow as a child was that he was an incompetent buffoon and a spoiled brat. And the mother lived in fear of him. And you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to the childhood first for obvious reasons. I shouldn't have to explain. Trump's father became the end all and everything else with him. And I want to say something. Trump does not have a bad chart. I've never seen a bad chart. What I see is weaknesses and strengths. It's the choices you make that are going to determine what happens with that. And as my good neighbor says, your actions are your best sermon. But Trump's father's actions and words were pretty much consistent on this. So Trump's father taught him that there are only 2 types of people in the world. Winners or killers. Winners are killers. Killers, in case you thought I said something else. Winners or killers or losers. You hear me? That was the major lesson that Trump's father taught him. Trump grew up determined to be a killer. You hear me? A winner, not a loser. And because of not bonding with his mother, the softer sides that he could have in his personality, well, you don't see too much of that. You know what I mean? Huh? So Trump's father, who he was fixated on, who was central to him, was brutal. He was not a kind person. He was, though, a good businessman. And this is extremely important to get straight. Trump's niece, who's a psychologist, wrote a book on Trump, and her analysis of Trump is that he was abandoned by the mother very early, in part due to troubled pregnancy, and then after that, not bonding together. And so this gave the father much more influence. So you don't hear Trump talking a lot about love and about kindness. You hear me? So this is the first thing. Now, when we look at Trump's astrological chart, if you look at the third area, you have the highest area, which I talked about, is Uranus and the sun. And then the next highest area, which is the two green planets in Saturn, Venus and Saturn, which I've just been talking about, I'm going to go back into in a minute, and then Mercury, which I'll come back to again. And then the next one that comes almost to the middle is a red planet, and that's Mars. Okay? Mars in Trump's chart is trined by the moon. Now, Mars's energy, it can be mental or physical energy. It rules Aries. The moon is the feminine principle. It's emotions, it's feelings, it's wisdom, it's the nurturing qualities, depending on how you internalize the moon. So this can either be the moon trine, and the moon here is over the only planet that's on the right-hand side. It's got an oval shape. That's the moon. The moon is trine Mars. That's an easy aspect. These are two energies. Why? Mars is in Leo, the moon is in Sagittarius. These are two complementary energies, but that does not mean that everything that comes out is going to be nice. And again, it's a question of what you choose to do with this. So this could be either intellectual or physical energy. With Trump, we know he's not an intellectual, so it's clearly more on the physical side. And this is the 12th house. What this means is this energy is affecting his subconscious. It's what's in his subconscious. And I'm going to say something else about this energy, because the first chart I did in astrology, I typed it up and everything, was for my father's girlfriend, who was a multimillionaire in real estate. And I told her something, and I'm going to tell you the same thing. Of course, you could say now that you already know this, but no, the aspects indicate this. Lao Tzu says Trump's mother's analysis is the best description. You don't really need a chart to see this. He is still that. Yeah, but the chart contributes to what he did with those choices. And she helped contribute to that, though it wasn't her fault. And she was abused by the father. He treated her terribly. And Trump learned how to treat women in part that way, but also through choices he made. So you can always say that That's easy to say, but the question is, what's driving him? And this is what this is telling you. So this explains Trump the bully. Moon trine Mars. And in the subconscious, Mars in the 12th house, the moon is in his home. So this is where he's experiencing things in his family. So in this house of the home, Trump has learned bullying behavior, and he's learned it from his father. And he's learned to use it physically and verbally with his mouth. And then from Cohen, who was a lawyer in Congress for a while, advising leading committee man in Congress who was dealing with the Red Scare. He had advice that the father took and passed on to the son, which is never admit wrong, and just keep on doing what you're doing. So what you see with this aspect is, including its impact on the subconscious, is that Trump very early learns to bully people to get his way. And in the family, he scared his mother a lot. And she, along with the father, would eventually stick him in a military school to try and discipline him. And all this did was bring out the bullying characteristics even more. If we look at Trump's whole life, his business has been conducted through bullying. His attorney, his major assignment until he turned on him, was to put pressure on Trump's clients, business associates, to bully them into various things. Frontline has done a little story on Trump. It came out in 2020, and it discusses the effect of military school on Trump. And he was sent there to be disciplined. He was there for 5 years. He loved military school because first he didn't love this. It was the first time he got slapped. But then, following his father's teaching, of there are only winners and losers, him deciding to be a winner, Trump learned to yell at his classmates. He pushed people around in the locker room. He beat people up. He was loud. He had virtually no friends, and he loved every minute of it. So in his childhood, Trump is learning a lesson. The way you get over is run over people. His father is telling him, winners aren't kind. Winners run over people. And so when Trump signifies about how he's representing the American people, how he's concerned about them. Oh, really? Huh. So let's look at Trump's mind. Now, this is a very interesting thing here. Trump, first of all, the mind is ruled by Mercury. And then the highest point, you have Uranus and the moon. And then next to it, the next highest point on the left side is this green planet. That's Mercury. Mercury is square Neptune. Mercury is in Cancer. Neptune is in Libra. This is an aspect of deception. This is a person who lies. Now, again, you can have this aspect and you don't have to be deceptive, but it's an inclination towards it. And Trump decided to go full bore. And when we look at some of the other qualities of Trump later, as we look at other aspects, we'll see why he particularly relies on the lie. You know what I mean? So that it's Mercury squaring Neptune in the second house. So the house that this Mercury is in the house of people that he knows, but he's not close to, associates, but they're not friends. And but Neptune is in the second house. That's a house of values and money. And so a lot of this deception has to deal with deceptive business dealings and Trump's lying about his business. Now I'm going to tell you something else about Trump and business later. But right now, I'm just dealing with the proclivity to lie, and the lying has especially to do with business. I'll just talk about one, and because we'll go into these businesses later. Trump had a university, right? People are coming here to learn Trump's secrets on success. Now, we know he wasn't successful. We'll go into that in a minute. But the people who he had teaching were, just people who are on the lecture circuit. They knew nothing about business, and they paid $35,000 often for these courses. The only person that got rich in these courses was Trump. I'm sure he didn't even pay his, the people who he brought in to teach that much. So a deceptive mind. But this is a mind, and Trump has a lot of planets in water and in fire. And when fire and water mix, and in air, when fire and water mix, it can heat up, and it can be a lot of anger and a lot of rage, or it could just be a person who's emotional, but not necessarily someone who's in a rage. And his mixture of elements, because he has a lot of planets in air and water, at its highest level, that can be somebody who can be dispassionate, which is what air does. You can stand back from things and really see things and analyze things. And then with water, you can feel what the people feel. But when your emotions have not been cultivated, you didn't get that motherly love, and you got a lot of cruelty, which you had some tendencies towards anyway, and you made the choice. And so what does Trump say about his own feelings? I'm quoting him. I bring out rage. I always have. I don't know if it's an asset or a liability, but whatever it is, I do. Trump also said that he attributes this rage to being able to do things. In other words, a lot of his decision making is made under rage, and that should tell you that's some really dangerous decision making. But he says, I get a lot done through that. The question is, what is that? We'll get into that. Bob Woodward, who's one of the people that I looked at, who did the thing on Nixon. He was one of the two authors that brought down Nixon. He wrote a book called Rage. And he had, in his first book, it was fear. And this is what he said. Fear. Trump in the White House. Trump was an emotionally overwrought, mercurial, meaning ruled by Mercury, which is a real good definition for a Gemini, but for him, it's really a good definition. Emotionally overwrought, mercurial, subject to change, unpredictable leader who created governing crisis. You hear me? Governing crisis. So the elements that Trump has, water and fire, air and water, that could have been used in a very positive way, have been used in a very negative way. And a lot of this coming from his subconscious, a lot of this that's driving him, he doesn't even know what's causing him to feel this way. And Trump, as I read Woodward's book, Rage, which was his book on the Trump presidency, when people would meet him on a day-to-day basis, they could expect to either get great optimism, everything is great, or fury and fire and rage. And this, he brought it out in others, and we'll see with his base that he would trigger into this, and it was also give him some real power. But this is also what makes him real dangerous. So this is part of Trump's mind. It's caught up in feelings and in gut level anger. Woodward described Trump as, quote, his upbeat cheerleading or angry self. In other words, he could be very optimistic if it's about him. Oh, everything is great, unless somebody is getting after him, in which they're doing him in. They're wrongfully attacking him. It's the fake media that is responsible, and all of this kind of stuff. Or he's in a state where everything's all right. And particularly if it's got to do with him, he's doing great. You know what I mean? He is the greatest. He got the greatest economy. He's the best president that Black people have had since Abraham Lincoln. So a part of the mixture of elements is upbeat, that's the air, cheerleading, and then angry, that's the fire, and that's the water. And this would describe his presidency, because you could never know which of these Trumps you were going to get. And I'm sure this also described his life. So what you see is part of the mind of Trump is disturbed, And there are some ways of describing this that I'll describe later that are even better. However, this aspect also gives Trump a gift. He has a gift. He can sense what the public is feeling and what they're going to do. And that is partially how he was able to win his first term. He, on his own, assessed where his base was at. And his enemies didn't give him credit for that, and they lost. Big mistake. Trump could see that the American masses of whites, particularly poor working class whites, were angry. And they were angry at the conditions that they were facing at the hands of the elite. And I'm going to explain why could Trump be a channel for them, because he would appear to be a part of the problem. So, as he said, he brings out rage in other people, the same rage that he has, and makes it appear that he can actually help people because he's supposed to be this great businessman. Now, part of Trump's lying has got to do with deception around financial values. And so he could, on the one hand, argue that He was great for the economy, and the economy was doing okay, but it's usually the corporations that make the big decisions unless you have major program that influences the economy. But Trump would say that he had the greatest economy ever. He had an economy that was okay until COVID came, and then it was a question of how he handled it. So this is key, in terms of his deception. That as a businessman, he squandered his father's wealth. Now, I just might as well say this. Trump has no skill in business. This should be obvious. There's a major reason he has no earth. This is real key. There's nothing wrong with people who have no earth. You may be a spiritual person, or there are other ways that you negotiate life. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a person in business with no earth, you're in trouble. And the only way he could have any money is to inherit it, because he didn't have a grasp of material reality so that he could accumulate it on his own. No earth. You hear me? What it means when you say no earth, that's practical stuff. Say down to earth, that's material stuff. That's see, touch, and smell stuff. That's where I used to be solely, or at least I thought, because I have a lot of earth, but I learned to get to this higher level. You know what I mean? This intuitive level, this spiritual level. But the point is, he ain't got no earth. So when he's telling people that he knows how to handle the economy, well, let's take an example of where he really messed up on the economy. He, on his own, against the advice of all of his advisors, decided to put a tariff on steel imports. Now, you got to understand what this means. America does not manufacture steel to any substantial amount. So he is saying these foreign companies and countries are taking advantage of us. So I'm going to throw a tariff on steel. His advisors all told him that steel manufactured abroad that we have to buy for our industry. If you put a tax on it, the people who buy it are going to have to pay more. You are hurting American industry. And they also told him, if you take it to a certain point, you can bring the economy down, because you have to keep your steel imports and your ability to do the manufacturing, which is only 10% or so of the economy, which Biden with his infrastructure plan has upped and is upping, then, you're going to be in a world of trouble. But he went ahead and did it because his mind says, let's do something and see. I'm quoting him, see what happens. Who in the hell does something with the major economy in the world? China manufactures the U.S. U.S. economy is still overall stronger, and you're going to mess with that, huh? And you're a capitalist. You don't know the first thing about capital and accumulating wealth and maintaining wealth. So Trump does not know business reality. I will come back to his economic failures later. They need to be listed. Trump's whole term in office, he promised people that he would have an infrastructure plan. He would address the needs of the people. Never did. In part, he was lying. In part, he didn't have the ability to figure out how, and he didn't need to. He could delegate that to people who did. But I'll show you that Trump don't believe in delegation, at least not to responsible people. And so Trump did not implement an infrastructure plan because he didn't want to. Number one, he really didn't care about the people, but didn't know how, and didn't know how to delegate it to people who could. So this is extremely important. Another aspect of Trump that makes his mind go off is, if you see this chart, you see all this stuff on the left side. These are all planets on the left side. There's only one on the right side in blue, and that's the moon. What does that mean? That means on the east side, when you see all planets on the east side, that means an extremely independent person with other aspects, energy relationships in Trump's chart. What this means is that you ain't going to be able to influence him on much of anything. He doesn't even know what he's going to do, and he definitely isn't listening to anybody else. But let's go back to Trump's mind. Comey, the FBI director, described conversations with Trump as chaotic-like, jigsaw puzzles with pieces picked up and then discarded and then returned to. So, Trump doesn't think logically, he doesn't think in terms of sequences. And so managing a government is going to be a real problem with this, This is his Secretary of Defense's description of Trump. He says, quote, in describing the current occupant of the White House, and he spent a number of years working as Secretary of Defense, a 3-star general. Trump called him Mattis, a term he didn't like. He said that he has no mental framework or mode for weighing and evaluating things. His lack of a mental framework, following Mattis's statement, was a reflection of another lazy part of Trump. Trump has an aspect that's a real good one. Sun, trine, Jupiter. Sun up here in the 10th house, trine Jupiter in his second house. Malcolm had that aspect. I have it. Malcolm didn't start to use this aspect until prison. This is an aspect that is a combination of the drive of creativity of the person inclining towards philosophy, religion, law, the higher systems of thought, depending on what culture you come out of. But essentially, a person with this aspect is going to be a reader. Trump didn't read. Why? Too lazy to, and it made him almost ill fit to be a leader. You don't read, you can't lead. Because at least in a world of writing, then a lot of wisdom is contained in books. Trump's Secretary of Defense, Mattis, had a library of 7,000 books. He was one of the few generals that read. And when he met with his complement, like the Secretary of Defense of China, he could actually go through Chinese and American history, what had been done, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And when he made recommendations, he could put it in a historical framework. Trump had no framework at all because his mind was all over the place, covered up in deceptions, because if you're lazy and don't develop the mind, then it's whatever comes into your mind. Mattis made the point that for the Trump administration, it was very important to have a situation where you did reading, listening, debating, and weighing alternatives. That's what you're supposed to do. But with Trump, that was out of the question. In fact, when he got briefings from the CIA, top secret briefings, they always had to read it to him because Trump never read the briefings. You know what I mean? And so he's running off of whatever comes to him. So this is a part of Trump's mind. Trump was also driven by self-will, a strong sense of self-will. He had real problems with his feminine side. And so even though he said he relied on his gut, his intuition wasn't all that great, but he could read a public sometimes. And so he also then had troubles and conflicts in his life with women. And this is also a part of his bullying aspect. I want to say this about the bullying aspect. The first chart I did on this was to my father's girlfriend. He was divorced from my mother by then. And she was a multimillionaire real estate investor. I did her chart, and she had this same Mars in the 12th house, and she had some other things going on. And when I did that, and this is the other aspect that I'm going to say about his bullying, I told her in the reading, and I read it to her, that she was doing something illegal, and if she didn't stop, she would end up in prison. I'm not a prophet. I don't do prophecy. And sure enough, she had a lot of the stuff that Trump has in his 11th house, which is detached friends, some of whom were police informants. And they informed on her, and she ended up in prison for dealing drugs when she didn't have to anyway, but especially since she made millions of dollars legally in real estate. But the point is, Trump's bullying leads to potential for imprisonment as well, or at least civil action. So we've seen the charge of rape against him and his bragging about how he could play with a woman's sexual parts and get away with it. You know what I mean? But this bullying is a big part of it. I don't do charts, so my sister would be the one to do that. Hecka, not me. I don't have time for it, except for stuff like this. So Trump's mind is in muddle. Okay. This is a key thing. And he's also a person who has inner conflict and inner struggles. This is caused by his Mars, his moon trine Mars. That energy, which is the feminine energy and the masculine energy and fire, even though they're trine, which means the energies flow well, these are energies that have Trump engaged in a lot of internal conflict, some of which is subconscious. He doesn't even understand it. He's a troubled person inside. And so it can lead him to change from one extreme to the other. And that is the aspect of moon trine Mars. And it can often lead him to do things that make absolutely no sense. One example is he had a good advisor in the Senate who was advising him. They had a golf game. He's a Republican senator. He's a friend of Trump. And Trump said that he was going to assassinate the leader of the Republican Guards in Iran. And this is a real right-wing senator, Graham. And Graham is scared to death of this. He says, but if you do this, there's going to be consequences. Have you figured out what Iran's going to do? He said, this is serious. And when the Iranians do it, they never do it directly. They do it through proxies. They do it indirectly. And it's a heavy hit. This is going to be a heavy hit. And he said, have you figured out what's going to happen? Well, Trump would just say, let's do it and let's see what happens. So this is part of Trump's mind, that he'll do something on impulse, doesn't even know he's going to do it before he does it, and doesn't consider the consequences. And so for a few days later, he killed Soleimani, killed him. You hear me? In spite of all the devastating consequences that would follow. So this is part of Trump's mind. Now I want to go to the essence of Trump's chart and then come back to the obvious, because this is what's not obvious. So you'll say, oh, I could figure this out already. Huh? No, you couldn't figure out why. You know, the most important aspect in Trump's chart, and it's the one that most people who have analyzed Trump have not figured out. For example, answer this question. How is it that the race between Kamala Harris, and Trump is so close when Trump has so many felony convictions? When Trump managed an economy that produced a lot of death under COVID, when Trump has just indicated over and over again that he doesn't know what he's doing. How in the hell can he be 2 points at best behind and in some swing states ahead? How can he do that? He has a loyal base. Oh, yeah, you'll say that. I know that. Yeah, but why? And this is where psychology just won't work. Trump has Sun conjunct Uranus. These are the two planets that I talked about before in his 10th house. 22 degrees in Gemini in the Sun and 17 degrees Uranus, both in Gemini. Conjunct, closest aspect. Now, what does this mean? Sun trine Uranus or Sun conjunct Uranus, and Sun conjunct Uranus shares the same qualities as the trine, are the best aspects for charisma that you can have when it comes to charisma. It is the best aspect. And Trump has a special kind of that. And it's easy to underestimate this because he doesn't have charisma that will move blacks. So we'll say, charismatic? Charismatic what? Or we'll say, oh yeah, he's charismatic because he acts like a gangster. No, this is a special gift, and it's in the 10th house, the house of the world. That means that if he could reach a prominent position, it's going to affect a lot of people. And it's opposed to his moon in other aspects, particularly Uranus is, which has some other meaning. And I'll go into that in a minute. So what does this mean? Sun conjunct Uranus. Of all the aspects, it promotes or can lead to the greatest possible public appeal. It can make a person extremely appealing with a part of the public. It can also create a situation where there are a lot of others who are opposed, but the amount who can be attracted can be great. What accounts for this? It's not even though there are ideas he puts forward, it is not primarily his ideas that are the main thing that makes him appealing. What accounts for Trump's appealing to the public is that he has certain qualities that attract people to him. And it's a magnetism. The magnetism of Trump is more important than even his message. The magnetism. And it is a magnetism, especially in a conjunction where the two planets are close together, but it's also true of the trine, but especially in a conjunction that once people come to him, they don't leave. That's the key point. You study psychology all you want, there's no explanation for this. It's a magnetic appeal, and it's a magnetic appeal that holds. And so, in spite of all the convictions, in fact, the convictions only drove some of these people closer to him. You hear me? Even though the deaths of COVID let a lot of people in caskets, those who were with him, they largely stayed with him. And he brought 7 million more new voters to the voting rolls the last time. And that's what he's trolling for right now, because I'll go into his strength as his weakness in a minute. So it's not the depth of his ideas, but it's this magnetism, but it's also the cause that in the beginning Trump claimed to represent. This is real key. It's the cause. And this is something that Obama and them completely missed. And it was the fact that Trump beat a field of approximately 16 opposing candidates in a successful presidential bid. And in the case of Bush's brother, former governor of Florida, he had over $200 million, and Trump didn't have anything because Trump ain't the billionaire he claims, and he's too cheap to put his own money into a race. But he didn't have enough to put in if he wanted to. So how did he defeat a field of 16 with no money and no ground game? And his ground game right now is weak because he doesn't have as much money as the Democrats have. And his field operation, I pointed out before, is heavily based on allied groups who are providing organizers. And when you have allies doing your basic organizing, good luck on that one, because you don't have the money, you know? And his appeal has been heavily to white working class whites and to a part of Obama's base, some of whom had identified with him before. Trump had a message. The magnetism of his appeal, his charisma, was combined with a cause. It was a fake cause. It wasn't one he intended to carry out, but it was one that the people believed in at the time and now are sticking with him even when he has proven that he is not serious about it. And what was that cause? He was the only one in the field of all candidates running for president who said the reason you're in misery right now, this economy and this country is in decline, is these trade deals are no good. That was not something that you would hear from any of the Republican candidates, or when he went up against Hillary, you didn't hear it from Hillary. You hear me? And so he was saying, I'm going to change this. So this is the first thing. Why would people identify with him on that? He's rich. Why are you going to think he's going to do this? Mainly because when you're looking at Trump, Trump is coming from the group that he is criticizing, and they believe he's independent of them and will stand up and fight for them. The truth is, it's not that he's against them. He's going to do whatever he wants to do, whether it's in their interest or not. That's Trump. Of course, right now, give him $1 billion and he'll let the oil companies do anything they want to. So they saw him as someone that would give the finger to the system that he came from, and they could believe it because he came from them and he was running against them. And no other elite group would say that, Democrat or Republican. would go against this. So that this was the basis for this. And of course, it was that the fact that the Democratic Party had given up on the working class. And so for a lot of reasons, they had begun to migrate to the Republican Party. So this generates a sense of false, among his base, it generates anger, but anger against the system and support for somebody who is generating the message. At the same time, the fake populace generates a message that can contribute to his own destruction. So this is Trump. His strength is also his weakness. And so we've seen that the base that Trump has built, which is mainly white, the strength is he's got a larger white base than the Democrats have. But the Democrats have a third of those who vote who are white. Trump's got the other 2/3, but neither have the majority of whites. But he's got the largest number. That's his strength. That's his weakness. His strength is white people. His weakness is that's all he's got. And the way you beat him is to outflank him with a third of whites on your side, with Latinos, Asians, Blacks, and sweeping it. The way you beat him is not just to rally your base. You have to do just like he's doing, and I'm not copying him. That's just the logic of this. The only way the Democrats are going to win in this is a sweep. It cannot be by 1 or 2 points because there's too much cheating the Republicans have done to make that very difficult. And if it goes to the House or the Supreme Court, you're into 1876 post-Reconstruction again. So the Democratic strategy has to be not only to rally its base, but to go out and get the disaffected, whether they are those who are not in any party or those who would vote Democratic that have never voted, whatever. And the few Republicans who are disaffected, and that would not be his base because his base is not leaving him. They're like glue to a letter. So it's a combination of magnetism and a message. The message is discredited now because Trump is now a mouthpiece for the economic elite that he claimed to be fighting for. But it seems not to matter for his base. And they are sold on Project 2025 that will give him full authority to do whatever he wants. And I say this about Project 2025 and the Supreme Court decision that has made him immune from a lot of prosecution if he is assuming the duties of the president. What they don't realize is they're giving authority to somebody that doesn't even know what he's going to do. And as bad as Project 2025 is, when Trump adds to it other things that he could do that are unthinkable, it's beyond comprehension. And Trump can't even tell you what that is. So Trump, while he has this appeal can also lead to his own destruction as he engages in extreme thoughts and actions. And so we see it in January the 6th when he leads the move to try and overthrow the election. Even though he's been able to get away with it so far, a lot of his followers have not. And somewhere down the line, especially if he's not elected president, somebody is going to get him. You hear me? Somebody is going to get him because they have charges that the Supreme Court cannot protect him from coming from the state level. So what is Trump's strength is his weaknesses. Now let's talk about biography and the observations of others towards him. This is true. Society, commentary, the Democrats were the main ones cheating with the Ku Klux Klan. That's true. And that's true. And right now, the cheating is kind of worked into the system. You just had a Supreme Court decision ruling for Arizona where the Supreme Court has ruled that it's all right for Arizona voter registrars to require that people show an ID when they register. ID of citizenship. And first of all, that's never been required before. But secondly, a lot of these people have already registered. So this is setting it up for being able to throw out a lot of votes. And we've seen the setups that have occurred in other parts of the state. And this is a setup to maintain white power in this country. But I want to go into the observations made of Trump by people who have observed him, who are supportive of the right wing, but not of Trump. And these references come from a referral made by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner, when being interviewed by Bob Woodward, gives him sources for understanding Trump's behavior. Now, this guy was doing everything for Trump. He was doing COVID work. He was handling the Jewish issue, the Zionist issue, the relationship to Arabs, of which he's profited immensely since the administration was over. He was doing all kinds of stuff, and he's close to being a billionaire himself. So he refers Bob Woodward to a series of quotes from a Wall Street Journal columnist named Peggy Noonan, Noonan. Wall Street Journal is about as conservative as it gets. And this is what she says about Trump. Quote, "He's crazy. It's kind of working." Meaning he's crazy and getting away with it. She also called Trump a circus act and a living insult. The circus act is what I just referred to, the magnetism that he can get up there and say almost anything, but he has a little cause that he's also talking about. And we know the other causes is immigration, which is a leading issue for the Republicans because it's the issue of upsetting the majority status of whites in this country. And so the charging of immigrants with crime and everything else, when immigrants have the lowest crime rate, and taking your jobs when they're doing jobs that Blacks and other people aren't doing. So she goes on to say, what you feel is disquiet. She goes on to say, Trump is crazy without any idea of how to govern over the whole course of the presidency. A mess, a stubborn manipulation. So this is part of what she has to say. And then she has some other things, because what happens is Woodward gets other references from Gerard Kushner that will help better explain Trump. And this is supposed to be, that's his son-in-law and a loyal supporter. So there's some other things that he has to say. And by the way, Noonan was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. So in case you think she's some kind of radical. She says, in talking about Trump, we are not talking about being colorfully craftily unpredictable, as political masters like FDR and Reagan sometimes were, right? But something more unfortunate, an unhinged or not fully hinged quality that feels like screwball tragedy. Noonan goes on to make this comment: crazy doesn't last. Crazy doesn't go the distance. Crazy is an unstable element that, when let loose in an unstable environment, explodes. And so you're disquiet. Sooner or later, something bad will happen. It all feels dangerous. Expecting more than that from the President of the United States should spring from the respect of the presidency. This is a comment made by Woodward. Now, Kushner goes on to provide another source for understanding Donald Reagan. Donald Trump. And this, he uses Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland. He says, he's paraphrasing from Alice in Wonderland. He paraphrased the cat. Quote, he says, "If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there." When Trump says he's going to do something and then see what happens, it means he doesn't know where he's going. And then he goes on to say, Kushner was explicitly saying Alice in Wonderland was a guiding text for the Trump presidency. Did Kushner understand how negative this was? Of course he did. Was it possible that the best roadmap for the administration was a novel about a girl who falls through a rabbit hole? And Kushner was willing to acknowledge that Trump's presidency was on shaky, directionalist grounds. The third source that Kushner recommended that you read to understand Trump was Chris Whipple's book, The Gatekeepers: How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. In the book, Whipple concluded that after the president, the chiefs of staff held the fate of the country in their hands. In a chapter on the Trump presidency added in March 2018, Whipple wrote that, quote, Trump, quote, clearly had no idea of how to govern. In his first year in office, he was reluctant to follow the advice of his two chiefs of staff. What seems clear is of this writing, and almost a year into his presidency, is that Trump will be Trump, no matter what his chief of staff thinks. Now, those of you who say Tweedledee, Tweedledum, we're dealing with dumb here. Tweedledee my butt. They're not both the same. And in the age of Project 2025, where there will be a complete overturning of the federal administrative state by Project 2025, you're going to have somebody in charge of it whose only advice is going to come from him, because as Project 2025 shows, it empowers him to fire the civil service and put in place those who will tell him what he wants to hear and not get in his way so that he can do whatever he wants to do. So one of the questions that the author Bob Woodward had was, after interviewing Trump, even in the course of his interview, because he did 18 of them for this last presidency, he said, I hope there's not a crisis. I hope there's not a crisis. That hope collapsed when COVID hit. And so when COVID hits, Trump is receiving a briefing, a top secret briefing that is coming from the CIA. And in that briefing comes a message about a virus that is unleashed in Wuhan in China. And while the briefer is minimizing what it means, Trump's national security advisor, O'Brien, tells him, this will define your presidency. This is the most serious issue that you will face, and it will define whether this presidency stands or falls. And the assistant to the national security advisor was a man named Pottinger. He was an ex-military man, a scholar, fluent in Mandarin, that had spent years in China and knew the ins and outs of China. He's an assistant National Security Council advisor. And so when he advises Trump that this is the most serious issue you're going to face, Trump turns to him and says, what do you think? I agree with him. And then he goes on to say, in the SARS epidemic, a viral epidemic that had occurred earlier, that came out of China, he said, the Chinese covered up. He said, what we're getting now and what we're going to get from China isn't going to be the whole truth. And he had contacts in China, medical contacts, people on the ground, doctors and everything else. And they were telling him things were already much worse. This was in January of 2020. And so then over time, over a short period of time, Trump's advisors come to him and advise him, one, to put a restriction of travel on China. They unanimously recommend it, so he doesn't have any way out. He agrees to it. Then they come back and say, 30-day extension. He agrees to it. He got no choice. And then they come back to him and say, this must be carried on much longer, because if we don't, the deaths are going to mount, and they were beginning to mount by then. Over 100,000 deaths by then, February, March, April. So in the beginning, and so Trump will say, when he's asked, how did you handle this crisis? He says, it was my decision and my decision alone. No, it was his CDC, it was his chief medical advisor, it was his national security advisor and assistant national security advisor. That's all advising the same thing. And when they come and say, you've got to shut this down, you've got to tell people to stay at home, that this virus is spreading too fast, he agrees to it in the beginning, but he's advised by Graham, his buddy in the Senate, that if you let people loose, that is, go back to work too soon, you're going to lose this election. That too many people die on your watch, you're finished. And at a certain point, he tells him, Biden's ahead of you now. And Trump's saying, oh, no. So up to this point, Trump hasn't done that bad. But when he makes the decision to now let the states decide when people can go back, then that's when hell breaks loose. And then he's advising everything from you don't have to wear masks to telling people to rebel and the whole 9 yards. 400,000 people in this country died. 400,000. 40% of the global deaths occurred in this country, and Blacks suffered the greatest amount because you had a know-nothing, troubled, as one of his national security advisors said, most flawed presidents or leaders that he had ever seen in the White House. And that's what you have running for office again. And I just want to use Trump's own observations to really seal just how serious this is. Yeah, Trump was talking about disinfectants and said that he had taken them, though he had taken the shots right away and didn't admit it. So this is the general observation of Trump's head of intelligence. This was his observation of Trump. He said he believed that Trump wanted to ignore any kind of process that went through experts, people steeped in certain issues or certain parts of the world, often for their choice of careers, in effect, and often literally, the president said, quote, and he's referring to what the president actually said, I don't need that to be done. I don't need those people. I don't need a national security council. I just need myself and perhaps 3 or 4 people I trust and work with. Trump didn't care for assessments, for processes, for plans, for any kind of organization to organize his presidency. And when he was asked by Woodward 15 questions on what he was doing about COVID, he barely had answers for most of them. He had received from Obama a plan for how you address a COVID outbreak or a global pandemic, 60 or 70 pages. One of his first meetings was with Bill Gates, who I don't think too much of, but who knows something about health and gave him some advice on things that you could do. And one of the things that he was going to do was shut down funding for the World Health Organization. You know, at a time in which COVID is spreading throughout the world. You're going to defund them when that is the major agency to give assistance, particularly to nations of color that don't have big budgets. He said, no, don't do that. Don't do that, you know. So, I could list all the business failures I have. I have the list of them, 15 businesses that Trump had that failed. I'm not going to even bother reading them, but beverage businesses, liquor businesses, all kinds of stuff, every one of them that went down the tube. An airline that couldn't even pay the loan for the airline, the monthly loan, let alone all of the casinos. He would build one, build another, and each one would compete against the other and fall apart. That's having no earth. You know what I mean? So you're talking about in an election where the 2 biggest issues right now are being treated as the border and the economy. When this is a man who, because of his incompetency, didn't just tank the economy, killed a whole lot of people. And right now has a plan for cutting more taxes for billionaires and a plan for seeing that he can do whatever he wants. So this is the astrological Ka-ori projection of Trump. It shows that no matter what you got, it's a question of what you do with it. And Trump has done very little. And we need to know the enemy. You need to know their strengths and know their weaknesses. And so in the next show, I'm going to do a thing on Kamala Harris and her strengths and weaknesses. And then in the following one, projections for strategies coming from a lot of different people. So that's it. Hotep. See if we got any comments or questions. Yeah. Hecka Trump said he'd be all right drinking disinfectants. Yeah. Yeah, Hecker said he's going to build a wall and didn't. And a wall ain't going to do nothing. Okay. Any questions or comments? Let me go up here and see what the comments are. I responded to a few. Lao Tzu, it seems that you are discounting the collapse of the American empire and the growing desperation among Europeans as they realize there's no dream. Whites are desperate. No, I'm not. I mean, that's been my whole point. I've been making that point since the show started. That's why I don't call it white supremacy anymore. You understand? Powers are rising that are displacing this power. Yeah, they still got a grasp on political and economic power here, but it's in decline. Gloria Briscoe, per article written by Reuters, 16 Nobel Prize winning economists say Trump policies will fuel inflation. Oh, yeah. And people will have to pay for it. Huge amount of money. Lao Tzu, does Trump have a working mind? Yeah, good question. Wolf Manlu, the only real stability to Trump is that he will never change his ways. Yeah, that's the way it appears to be. Yeah, Wolf Manlow is making the point that if Trump knew what he thinks is a strength, which is standing on his own and not listening to anybody, being independent on his own, that if he knew that, he might take steps to correct it. Yes, but since he was raised and his philosophy has very little introspection in it, he's not the only president that has that, but very few that ain't going to listen. It's just that some aren't too introspective. Yeah, but what Trump's now Lao Tzu, his mother's analysis of Trump is the best description. Don't really need a chart to see this. No, you need a chart to understand why he would be so open to the father. The mother's describing the end result. She's not talking about what the father contributed, but what Trump contributed himself, because he had a chart that had trouble in terms that it indicated that he would have a troubled family in the chart. That's probably part of what he picked in heaven. That's probably part of his test, you know, that he was going to have a father who's away most of the time, who's a tyrant, got all these things, and a mother who was going to be inaccessible in part because she was ill. And then after that, they didn't bond. And then after a while, the mother's afraid of him, you know? So if we combine the Ka or the Ori with this astrological chart, these are tests Trump picked. And he made choices afterwards. And there were people pushing him in a certain direction. But his brother, his older brother, rebelled against the father, became an airline pilot, and the father got him fired from every job he was in, and ended up an alcoholic and whatnot, you know. But he made other choices. Didn't have to do what Trump did. Okay, Kamazar, bioweapons, that's not the subject for this discussion. But yeah, they have bioweapons. Okay, let's see if there's anything else down here. Gloria Briscoe, there's been 3 Gemini presidents. Yeah. JFK, George W. Bush, and Donald J. Trump. Yeah. And it's interesting that JFK was dealing with another Gemini head, which was Khrushchev. Okay. Question: how significant was Trump seeing the way their father responded to his brother's rebellion to his development? Trump had adopted the attitude of the father towards the brother and heaped all kinds of scorn on him and treated him with total disrespect. And he was the older brother. And he also saw advantages to that because he'd be able to inherit the throne, something that he was just completely incapable of handling. So he just followed the father and whipped abuse on his brother, you know. Now, Hecka makes the point, we need to organize and make you all demands. That's correct. And in the third of this show, we're going to do projections on that, and you should come in with your own, but hopefully in your communities, you're doing your own organizing. Ancient African mindset, global systems in place now have their own agenda trying to hold on to its power. That's true. And a lot of Project 2025 is about holding on to white power. There's one provision in there where they lay out a plan to take the target for recruiting in the military back to the 1970 levels, meaning that the demographic group that they should draw from should be in alignment with the 1970s, which is predominantly white. And that's really just another way of saying that this is a blueprint for white power and for holding on to every bit of power that we can. But white power in the hands of very few people, one to be exact. I've already done this. Would you please tie these astrological teachings to the spiritual teachings of Kemet? Kemet was organized, modeled after the model of heaven, just like Western societies are modeled after the profit margin or the profit motive or material wealth. So their teaching was as above, so below. Astrology is the system for explaining how the below is inside of each of us. Now, in Kemet, they were mainly concerned about how this manifested for the pharaoh. But today, we would apply this to how it manifests for each person. So that's one part, that the entire system was organized on a spirit basis. Every component of it, again, is aligning with the astrological thing. So in the case of astronomy, astrology, the day for worship was determined by astronomy, astrology for different netters. That was determined by astronomy, astrology. So it was a core part of the Kemetic. And for those African societies like the Dogon, for the Dogon and other African systems. So it was central, you know, and it was essentially important for the priesthood because they were using this for all kinds of timing tied to the calendar and tied to the regulation of an agricultural society. So it had a lot of different meaning. In previous shows, I've talked about the precessional cycles, and there's plenty of indication, I've done a show on this, that the Kemites knew about this roughly 26,000 precessional cycle. And so they viewed history through this lens. That's talking about a long view of history. But it was inextricably tied to destiny and a person's destiny, very much. For Kemet, the pharaoh, but for today, each human being. Hope people got something out of this. Hotep. Until the next time.